As Scrapper logs into a site cleanly, adds an item to the cart, walks 2 pages into checkout, and then gets logged out for no reason, nothing in the code changed. What changed was the address underneath it. The proxy rotated in the middle of the flow, and the site saw the same logged-in cookie suddenly arrive from a different city, decided that made no sense, and dropped the session. Today I want to walk through rotating and sticky proxy sessions, how each one actually works down at the proxy layer, and how I pick between them for a real job. I run proxy farms and production scrapers for a living, so this is not theory of a vendor page, it is a setting I have gotten wrong and had to fix. I will keep it honest, which means no talk of undetectable sessions or magic rotation, because neither exists. Rotating and sticky are not two products, they are two ways of using the same pool, and picking the wrong one breaks your session or burns your pool. Matching the behavior to the job is the whole skill. What a session even means here. Start with what a session is, because both settings revolve around it. To a site, a session is a sequence of requests it treats as one visitor. Two things carry that identity. One is the cookie the site handed you at login, and the other is the address that cookie keeps arriving from. A careful site cross-checks them, so the identity a scrapper presents is the cookie and the IP together. And the moment those two stop agreeing, the site has a contradiction to act on. What rotation actually is? Rotation just means the gateway hands you a fresh address on some schedule, or a brand new one on every single request. You point your client at one endpoint, and behind it the provider swaps which upstream address your traffic leaves from. The point is to spread load so no single address gets hammered, and to keep any one IP from building a reputation under your job. That is genuinely useful for wide collection. But notice what it does to identity. It changes where you appear to come from, over and over by design. What a sticky session actually is. A sticky session is the opposite setting on the same pool. Instead of a fresh address each time, the gateway pins one address to you and holds it for a window. You ask for it, usually by putting a session ID into the proxy username or by connecting to a dedicated sticky port, and every request you send through that token leaves from the same upstream IP until the window ends. The pool is identical. The only difference is whether the gateway keeps handing you the same door or a new one. How the proxy layer pins an address. The mechanism explains the limits. When you send a session token, the gateway looks it up, reuses the address mapped to it, or picks one and remembers the mapping if there is none. Hold the token steady and you hold the address. Let it change or expire, and the gateway is free to hand you someone new. So stickiness is a lease on an upstream address, and like any lease it has a length and it runs out. How long sticky actually lasts? Those windows are shorter than people expect. A lot of residential pools default to something like 1 to 10 minutes, and many let you request up to 30 minutes or an hour if you ask. Residential and mobile are best effort, because the real home line or the phone behind your address can drop off at any time and take your window with it early. So you plan for the address to change, not for it to last. Why rotate per request? Rotation is the right call when your job carries no state. A broad public crawl, thousands of product pages with no login, no cart, nothing the site ties back to a single visitor, is exactly the shape that wants a fresh address often. Each page stands alone, so there is no session to break, and spreading those requests across many addresses keeps any single IP from drawing a red flag. For stateless collection, rotation is not just fine, it is the safer setting because it stops you from concentrating load on one door. Why hold one IP? Stickiness is the right call the moment your job has memory, a login, a cart, a multi-step form. Pagination that only works while the site thinks you are one continuous visitor. Anything where request 2 depends on request 1. All of that lives inside a session the site is tracking, and that session expects the same address throughout. Hold one IP for the length of the flow, and the story stays consistent. The cookie and the address agree from the first click to the last, and there is no contradiction for the site to catch. The mismatch that logs you out. Now the two failure modes, because both come from mismatching the setting to the job. Rotate in the middle of a stateful flow, and you get the logout I opened with. You log in from one address, and 2 requests later, the same session cookie shows up from a different IP in a different city. No real person teleports between clicks, so the site does the safe thing and ends the session or throws a challenge. The flow breaks and it looks random until you realize the address moved under you. The mismatch that burns the pool. The opposite mistake is quieter but just as costly. Hold one sticky address across a huge stateless crawl and you funnel thousands of requests through a single IP that a rotating pool was built to spread. That one address climbs the site's rate counters fast, earns a reputation all by itself, and gets throttled or blocked while the rest of your pool sits idle. Stickiness concentrates trust on one door, which is exactly wrong when the job never needed a door held open. Sticky is not forever, designed for that. Even when you pick stickiness correctly, treat the window as fragile. The lease can expire mid-flow, and the residential or mobile address can vanish early when the underlying line drops. So build the flow to survive an address change. Instead of assuming one address carries it, start to finish. Checkpoint your progress. Hold the cookie jar so you can resume, and detect a surprise logout rather than plowing past it. The durable version recovers cleanly when the window ends before the job does. Flip one session's identity together. A clean mental model helps here. Treat one logical session as one bundle, a single session token, a single cookie jar, one consistent set of headers, all pinned to the one address for the window. The failure I see most is a shared cookie jar bleeding across rotating addresses, so the same login state leaks out of 3 different IPs inside a minute. That is a contradiction you built yourself. One session, one identity, one address, and when you rotate the whole bundle together, not just the IP under a stale cookie. Subtrend. Geography has to stay put. Geography is part of that identity, and it has to hold still for the length of a session. A sticky window should stay inside one city, and ideally one network, so the flow does not jump from a Singapore address to a US address halfway through a checkout. Price and availability shift by location, so a wandering session can also quietly corrupt the data you collect, not just get you flagged. When I pin a sticky address, I pin the region with it, and I check that the pool honors that and does not silently drift countries. Concurrency with sticky sessions. People worry that stickiness kills throughput, and it does not. You just parallelize differently. Each sticky session is one worker holding one address for one flow. To run 50 logged-in flows at once, you open 50 sticky sessions, each with its own token, its own address, its own cookie jar. You get concurrency from many held addresses side by side, not from rotating inside a single session. So stickiness and scale are not in conflict. You scale by the number of independent sessions instead of by churning addresses under one. The tier changes how sticky behaves. Which tier you rent changes how well stickiness even holds. A data center address is yours for the rental, so you can pin it for hours without it moving. Residential stickiness is best effort because you are borrowing a real home connection that can go offline whenever its owner does. Mobile is looser still because carrier networks reassign addresses on their own schedule and share each one behind net. So the same sticky setting gives you a rock-steady address on one tier and a window that quietly resets on another. Mobile rotation you did not ask for. Mobile deserves its own note because it rotates in ways you do not control. A mobile address can change when the carrier moves you between towers or reassigns its net, so even a sticky mobile session can hand you a new IP earlier than the window you set. That sounds like a flaw, but for the right job it is a feature, because that natural churn reads as ordinary movement rather than obvious rotation. Just do not build a long stateful mobile flow that assumes the address will sit perfectly still, because sometimes it will not. How I decide per job. So here is the rule I actually run. I ask one question first. Does this flow carry state the site ties to the address? If yes, a login, a cart, anything sequential, I go sticky and I size the window to the length of the flow with a margin. If no, a wide stateless pool, I rotate, often on every request, to spread the load. Then I test on the real target, because a site can tie a session to the IP harder or looser than you expect. 2 jobs, 2 settings. To make it concrete, 2 jobs I ran back to back. One was a login gated account area. a few pages deep per visit. Rotating per request logged me out every second or third page until I switched to a 10-minute sticky window, and then each visit finished clean. The other was a broad price scroll across tens of thousands of public pages. A sticky address there hammered one IP into a rate block within the hour, and moving to per request rotations spread the same work quietly across the pool. Same tool, opposite settings. The honest limits? Let me be straight about the boundaries. Matching rotation to the job keeps your sessions intact and your load spread, but it does not make anything undetectable, and no setting on a proxy does. It does nothing about a loud client, a bad handshake, or a request rate no human would produce. And it changes nothing about what you are allowed to collect. Public data, the robot's file respected, an official IP preferred where one exists, and whatever a site's terms actually say. Rotation and stickiness are plumbing, not permission. I run this in production every day, real proxy farms and real scrapers, so the way I pick between rotating and sticky here is the way I actually run the jobs, not theory. If you want to go deeper, the full written guides and the pools and settings I genuinely use are at Data Research Tools.com, where I break it down with real block rates and no undetectable promises. So to recap, rotation hands you a fresh address to spread load across stateless work, and a sticky session pins one address so a login, a card, or a multi-step flow stays consistent. Sticky windows are short and best effort, so design the flow to survive the address changing. Rotate a stateful job and you get locked out. Hold one address across a stateless crawl and you burn it. So match the setting to whether the job carries state and test on the real target. Subscribe for a new scraping infrastructure breakdown, and I'll see you in the next one.